Hi there and welcome to another Unity 5 tutorial. Today we're going to create a radar system which shows us where different objects are on our map. Now I've started here with the running granny tutorial with the health bar, which you can find. So this is using the exact same code that we had before, and I'm building on top of it. Okay, so if you want to follow along, it's a good idea to build this tutorial first. Of course, you don't need to. You can have any character and this will work. So in this code, though, what I've got is my main character, and she has a rigid body, which is kinematic, turned on, no gravity. And I've got a box collider around her. So if we just go into this view here and find her. There she is, just a simple box collider. And this is needed to collide with objects that we're going to be picking up, like we had the chest in the previous tutorial. So the radar system is going to sit down in this bottom corner here, and it's going to show the position of where all these objects are in the environment. So let's create a panel that will act as our radar. So select the canvas, right click, UI Objects, and we're going to create a panel. Okay, so that panel is going to take over the whole screen as it does by default. So if we click into 2D view here and just zoom out, move around a bit, you'll see your entire panel. And whilst we've got that panel, we can just resize it and just position it, whoops, not like that, into the bottom corner. So about there. And on top of that panel, we want to show little dots of where our objects are that are in the environment. So first of all, let's just create a dot. And to do that, I'm going to select the panel and then right click and go UI Image. Now you can see that that image is quite large, and that's not how big you want your dot to be on the radar, so we'll have to resize that. And you may at this point also want to change the color of it. So let's say we want our points of interest to be bright pink, like that. And we're also going to resize it at the same time and make it quite small, which I might do over in this system over here. So in the inspector, let's change it to, what do we think, 16 by 16? That might still be a little bit too big for a radar point, but I'll leave them about that size so that you can see how this is all working, and you can change that as you like. So that's going to be one of our radar dots. So let's just rename that to pink dot, like that. And let's create another one, which we could just duplicate this. So Control D on that, and we'll call this blue dot. So you can have different things showing up on your radar. And because that's blue, it needs to be blue. So let's make it a light color like that. Okay. Right, so we've got our blue dot and our pink dot, and I'm going to now take those and make prefabs out of them. So just drag them down into assets, blue and pink. Okay, and then we delete them. We don't want them up here anymore because it's going to be the objects that create those dots to show up on this panel. Right, now the next thing we need are some objects that are going to show up. So let's create some in our landscape. Okay, so because it's Easter weekend, I'm going to create some Easter eggs. So let's go back to our 3D view, find where Granny is. And let's create in here 3D object sphere, and we'll just move that out and over to the side so we can see it. And then I'm going to resize it so it looks like an egg. And I also found this nice texture here in Google, so if I just drop that onto there. Okay, so now we have a nice shiny Easter egg, and onto that Easter egg we want to add a rigid body so that it falls to the ground. You don't have to do this, but I just want it to fall to the ground when it first starts. Right, so let's call that our egg. And you can see it's actually attached to Granny, which is not what we want up here. So I'm just drag it down to get it out of there. So there's our egg. Okay, so when we run this, the egg will just drop and land on the ground. Now we want Granny to be able to run over it and pick it up like the chest. So currently nothing happens because there's no script on there. So we're going to use the pickup script that we created in the last tutorial, and this is it here. If you're creating this from scratch and following along, I'll just show you what that looks like. So this is the pickup script, and it has an on trigger enter, so that when the player runs over the top of it, the player's health is increased by 20, and then the object itself is destroyed, and that's all it is. This player manager is something we created in the previous tutorial. So let me just go back to here, and I'm going to attach that pickup to this egg. Alright, so now when we run this, we can wait a little while for the health to go down. Okay, and then when we run over the top of this egg, the egg disappears and the health is topped up again. Alright, great. Now we want this egg to appear in our radar. So there's a number of different ways you could do this. One way that I've used in the past is to constantly ask the game hierarchy to find all the objects that should appear in the radar and display them. But when you use like find objects or a find on game components, it's really quite processor heavy. So it's not necessarily a good way to do it. What I'm going to show you how to do in this tutorial is to have each object accountable for their presence in the radar, so that when they appear on the map, they're going to sort of inject themselves into the radar, and when they're destroyed, they're going to remove themselves to the radar, so that we're not constantly going around asking the environment what objects exist. And this is a more efficient way of doing it. So we need to create some radar code to put onto our radar. Now I've already made it, so I'm just going to call this panel we created before our radar, and drag and drop this radar script onto the radar panel. Okay, I don't know why my Unity is so slow today. Okay, now I'll just show you what's in this radar script. Let's open it up. Okay, so the radar script is going to create or keep track of a list of all the objects that it's going to display. So for that, we're actually using a C# list construct, for which you will need this library here. Now, this is working also with images to display the dots on the radar, so you're going to need this library as well. So make sure you've got Unity Engine UI and System Collections Generic at the top. Right, then I've got a very little class which is keeping track of the image icon that's on the radar and which game object owns it. So when that egg says to this script, hey, I exist, the script will then be able to link back to that egg as well. So this is just a nice little simple class for a radar object. Now, the image that's going to be displayed on the radar is going to use one of those prefabs we created before, the pink or the blue, and it will get assigned by the owner, and I'll show you that later. So that's another script. Okay, then in this radar code itself, it needs to know the position of the player. So the radar is going to position the player right in the center of the display all of the time, so that you will see where those objects are around the player and the distance to them as the player is moving around. We then have this map scale value, so we can increase or decrease the relative distance of the radar objects from the player. So that essentially makes the map look really large in the radar display or really small, depending on how many objects you want to see. Next, we have this public static list, which is an array. If you're not familiar with lists, do Google that into C# and have a little bit of a read. But basically, a list is a fancy array that does a lot of extra functionality. And what's really nice about it is you don't have to give it a size. So it sort of looks after itself. If you have a plain array, you have to look after its size. And at this point, the radar doesn't know how many objects that it's going to be displaying. So it's best to use this list. Okay, now we've got a couple of functions here that are also public static functions, which are called from the object itself, so the egg. So when the egg says I exist, it runs this register radar object function, which injects it basically into this array here. And so you can see that the register radar object function brings across the object, which is the owner, which would be the egg, and its image that it wants the radar to display. Okay, and then it creates an instantiation of that image. So this is just the prefab coming across, and it creates an instance of that, which it then adds a radar object into the array in a pair of owner and image. Okay, going down, we then have a similar function that can be called by the egg object when it gets destroyed. So this is remove radar object. And it loops through the list, looking for the owner existing in that list. When it finds the owner, it actually destroys the icon. So it removes that icon from the radar display. And what it's doing is it's copying objects from the radar objects array into this temporary new list here. So it's copying from one from the other and just copying them over, except when it hits the owner. When it hits the owner that's going to be removed, it doesn't copy them over. So by the end of this for loop, the new list doesn't have the object that's being destroyed in it. So it's actually -1 object. Then we remove everything out of the old rad objects list and then put in the new list. So essentially this code here is just removing one item from that list but managing it for us. All right, so that's the two functions that will be run from the radar object itself, so from the egg in this case. Now the object that's doing all of the displaying is this draw radar dots function. And this is being constantly called in here from this update. What it does is it loops through the radar object array or the list that you've created. And for each object, it gets the owner's transform position and determines the difference between its position and the player's position. And then it does some calculations on the angle as well as the distance. And then you can see here, this line here, delta y is working out the angle between the player, which is the player pos Euler angle dot y. The Euler angle dot y is the angle that the player is rotated around its y-axis. Okay, so y-axis is the axis that's going straight up through the head of the player. When you turn, the y angle is the one that's changing, and that's the one that you want to use. Okay, so that's grabbing that, and then it's calculating the position on a circle of the radar object using these polar equations. Okay, now if you're not familiar with polar equations, these are the equations that you use if you're generating a circle, because any object in your radar is going to be sitting on a circle radiating out at a distance. Now I've just drawn a little diagram I want to show you. So here is the player, okay, and they're facing this way, okay, and your Easter egg's sitting over here. So this Easter egg has a particular distance that it is from the player, and that distance is calculated using your X difference and your Y difference between you and the Easter egg. Actually, this would be, if you're looking down on the map, this would be Z. So it would be DZ, but you get the idea. And then you need to use tan and that to calculate this angle here, which is the angle that you want this Easter egg to appear on your radar. And then also, as your player turns around in the scene, this egg, its distance is not going to change unless the player moves. But let's say the player doesn't move and they just turn around on the spot. This egg is actually going to move around on a circle around the player. And to do that, we need the cosine and the sine functions used in our equation. Now, I'm not going to go into all of the maths behind that, but if you're interested, just have a look at, what would you say, polar to parametric in Google for a circle coordinates, and it'll actually show you these two things come up, cosine and sine. Anyway, just believe me that this is going to work, and this will then draw that Easter egg at that distance and keep it rotated as the player rotates. We're then going to grab the icon of the player's object, and this is the prefab we created before, and make it a child of the panel. And then we're also going to set its position based on the radar pos X and radar pos Z that we calculated up here on that circle at a distance from the player, plus the actual position of the radar panel itself, so that it's coming from the center of that panel. All right, now this here where we're setting the icon to be the parent, there's nowhere else in this code that you can actually do that. This is going to happen every time, even though once it's connected, it doesn't need to be set to the parent again. But because of these functions up here, where you're adding the image for the first time, it won't let you use this set parent inside of this static function for numerous reasons. Anyway, so I've put it down here. Okay, so we're going to save that and switch back over into Unity. That code radar is attached to our radar, which is here. Okay, now it needs the player position, so we're going to drag the player position and put it just there. Now, we currently run this and nothing will happen, nothing will appear, because that egg hasn't registered itself with our new radar system. Okay, so that's where we write some more script. This is another C# script called make radar object, and I'll just open that up. This is the script we're going to attach to any object in the scene that we want to inject its presence into the radar. And it's quite simple. It has a hold of the image prefab, so this is what it wants to be displayed as on the radar. And in the start function, as soon as this object comes into life, it's going to call that static function of register radar object. And this basically injects itself, its image, into that list array that we had before and makes its presence known. And then when the object is destroyed, in the onDestroy function, we're going to remove that object from that list. So that's quite simple code. Going back to here, we'll attach that make radar object onto the egg. And once that's finished attaching, which I hope it did, no it didn't, put it over here, there we go. We're going to attach our image prefab, which is this blue dot that we had. So with your egg, grab your blue dot if that's the one you want to have the egg appear as. Okay, and now when we run it, that egg should inject itself into the radar, and you can see it there that it's come up as that light blue color. Now as the character runs away, you can see that you're getting further away, and that object moves on the radar accordingly. Okay, so if we're headed forwards, which is going to be the up direction on our radar view, you'll see that the egg gets closer to the center point, because our character's center point is actually right there, and they're always in the center of this radar. And if I turn the character around on the spot, you can see now the effect of that object turning around on the circle. Now, if you want to make it a little bit more obvious where the player is on the radar, let's just create, attached to the radar, an image. And that image will be at 0, 0, 0, right in the center. I'm going to make it like 16 by 16 because I've actually got a texture which is 16 by 16, which is this little tiny arrow. And put that on there. And you can see that this will just stay there when we run and show you that the forward direction of our character is facing up on that radar screen, and always in the middle. And so this Easter egg is over this way. So if we turn that way, we can now see that Easter egg come into the field of view of the radar. So now that you've got this egg, you could make a prefab of it and put multiple copies all around the map. What we can do simply is just go into our scene view and Control D and duplicate our egg and just make multiple copies and drag them all around the place. Like that. And because they've all got that code on it, when we run it, you'll see that we've now got all of these eggs. So we've got one that's basically on top of our player, which would be this one here. Then there's one very close by, which is that one there. And you can see the other ones moving over here. There's another one there. Now, remember that we've got the pickup code from our previous tutorial on this, so that when we run over these eggs, they will disappear. And when we run over them, they will run that destroy from radar code, or remove from radar, and you can see that they disappear as well. Like that. Okay, now when we first run it, you might notice that you've got this object that's outside of the range of your radar, which is not what you want, because you could end up with dots all over the screen. You want to restrict them into here. So we can easily fix that by putting a mask on the radar image, or making the radar image itself a mask. So if we add component in the inspector when we've clicked on the radar and go mask, you'll find it just comes up here. We just click on that and it will become a mask of itself, and you can show the graphic or not show the graphic depending on whether that is going to mask just an area without showing it. Or showing it itself. So we're going to leave it like that. Now if I run it, you'll see that you can't see this egg that's right up here in the distance because it's off of that map. But as we run towards it, it will now appear in here. Okay, now if you don't like the square graphic, you can create your own. So I've grabbed an image here which is just a round circle. Let me put that in the background. Okay, so now you can see I've got this round radar here. Its alpha's a bit too dull for me. I'm going to just bring it up so it's a bit more opaque so you can see it. And now when I run that, okay, you can see that it's masking those objects within the circle and that they come into view, and they also then pop out of view. And at this point, you might start thinking that they're a little bit too big for being radar dots, and well, you know, you can edit them and make them smaller. You could also have their own icon on there as well. If they're different objects, you could put like a little image on here and display that. All right, so we've made this so that you can have different colored dots for different objects. So let's just add one more object in here, so we can see those different colored dots. Now I grabbed this rabbit because it's Easter weekend. Isn't he gorgeous? Which I got from the asset store for free. So this is a cartoon character rabbit by J and M. So feel free to grab that for free and throw it into your scene. So this is our rabbit, and onto that rabbit we need to add our pickup script and also our make radar object script. Now, for this rabbit, its image is going to be the pink dot. So I'll just drag that pink dot prefab we made previously over into there. Now, the rabbit itself needs to have a collider on it, or you could add a rigid body. Actually, or you could add both, because you'll need both in order for Granny to run into it. So let's just add box collider. Let's go see what that did over here. And let's lift that box collider up just a little bit. That might do. Okay, now when we run it, we should get a pink dot as well as the eggs. And we have our big bunny that we can run over the top of. And he disappears and gives us extra health. And then we can go around and pick up the eggs as well. Now, before I finish, I just want to make you aware of one little issue that you might have, is that if you change the pivot location of your radar system, so currently in the default state when we create the radar, we've created it with the pivot in the middle, with the anchor in the middle and the pivot in the middle of the actual rectangle itself. So if we just come in here, you can see that's your anchor, and the pivot, which shows up in that as that blue square, is in the center here, which means that the 0, 0, 0 of this is going to be in the center, which is exactly where we want it for the radar, because that's the origin that the radar is working off. So everything is going around that central 0 point. Now, if you were to move that pivot point down into the bottom corner or somewhere else, so if we hold down the shift key and move it here, and you can see that it's popped down there along with the anchor as well. The anchor where it is doesn't matter, but it does with this pivot. If I now run this with that pivot down in the bottom corner, you can't see it here, but what happened is the whole of the radar stuff has now gone down to there. And if I just run backwards a little bit so you can see it. And now if I turn my model around, you can see those points, and they're all rotating around the pivot point, which is now down in the bottom corner down here. And you don't want that. So you have to ensure that your pivot point is in the center of the radar panel. And now it won't rotate around the center. So just be careful when you're moving your panel around for your radar that you keep that pivot point in the center of that object. Okay, so that's how to create a simple radar system. One thing I'll tell you before we go that we didn't cover, if I go back to the code for radar, if you want to make the distance between those objects scaled bigger on the radar itself or scaled closer together, you can play around with this map scale value here. So if you make this bigger, the images will appear, the dots will appear to be further away from each other in the radar. If you make this smaller, then you will get the dots a lot closer together, which is when you probably want to think about making those dot sizes a little bit smaller, which I've sort of overemphasized them. All right, so that's it for this tutorial, and I hope you enjoyed it and learnt something about the maths of a circle and different angles and distances. But it's really simple but quite powerful what you get in this application. And now please feel free to add lots of different objects and change their images for different icons on here, which would be really, really nice and effective. Okay, so that's it. Until next time, have fun with Unity.